welcome to FPTV New Releases, where it's absolutely my privilege to be joined by one of my old mates, Ben Robinson. How you doing, mate?
Hello.
Great to see you.
All right. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you, mate. True story, I met Ben Robinson on the prison set of Guardians of the Galaxy. How is that for some major science fiction superhero name dropping? And we are here with an absolute legend of the visual effects business and industry, the chief visual effects supervisor on so many iterations of Star Trek, Mr. Dan Curry. How are you doing, Dan?
Biologically functioning today. It's doing very well. We're here in California, suffering with horrendous weather. It dropped down into the lower 70-degree Fahrenheit range, so we had to break out sweaters to deal with the chill.
Man, that is really tough. From the heart of West London, I'm absolutely feeling your pain. So we're here to talk about something that we're really proud of at Titan Books, and we're here to talk about for FPTV, which is Star Trek: The Artistry of Dan Curry, the beautiful coffee table book all about Dan's fantastic Star Trek career, written by the mighty Ben. You know, so thank you very much for joining me, both of you guys.
It's a pleasure.
Well, I'd like to say it's really all about the wonderful team of people I got to work with. I was just one of many. And
I have to say something here. I have to say I actually had to take out half of Dan's compliments to other people because it would have made the text flow so kind of like, it would have been twice as long because he would have stopped to say how brilliant everybody was at every possible opportunity.
Well, you know, that's what makes you a great human being, not just a true professional, you know. So I think it's a very what's the word I'm looking for? It's a very humble thing to do, which I wholeheartedly endorse. But right now we're here to celebrate you, Dan, and your mighty achievements. So can you let the viewers here at FPTV know how it was that you got started in visual effects?
Well, when I was a boy, I went to see Ray Harryhausen's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and watching the movie in the theater, I could tell there was a different reality in the background than the dinosaur. And I saw a magazine article about how they did it, and I happened to have a broken 8mm projector and a 8mm camera that could do one frame at a time. So I shot pictures of my brother running around screaming, and then had a toy dinosaur move stiffly frame by frame. And how I made the system was I taped a piece of tracing paper inside a cardboard box that I cut a hole in and rear projected the movies of my brother behind the toy dinosaur. And that was my beginning.
Now, so
what all 8-year-olds do.
Yeah, of course. And what was your first awareness of Star Trek?
I'm sorry, my first what?
When did you first become aware of Star Trek? What was your first exposure to it?
I was in high school when the original series was on, and then went to college in the Cretaceous period when I was a student. Nobody had TVs. It was unheard of, so I didn't really see much of the original Star Trek. Then I went overseas for a number of years and didn't really start becoming aware of it till I came back.
Yeah, okay. Now, actually, I just want to ask you a question there, if I may just interject for a second. You mentioned you went overseas. That was when you were with the Peace Corps, am I right?
That is correct. And little did I know at the time that some of those experiences would become part of Star Trek.
That's precisely what I wanted to ask you, actually, is what the impact of that time was.
Well, if you look at the exteriors of Klingon architecture, for example, you'll see it's a combination of Laotian and Himalayan architecture. And I even did the Klingon lamasery, which looks like it could be kind of a high-tech Tibetan structure. And then it also exposed me to martial arts, and I started martial arts. It turned out most villages had their own secret martial art that they practiced for generations, because living out in the jungle, they really had to be able to protect themselves. And then as I progressed and the villagers were very kind to the clumsy foreigner, then I got to study with some really great masters, and that eventually evolved into Mokbara for the Klingons and the Klingon weapons.
Yes. Well, I'm more on those in a second. Something about you. What kind of branch of martial arts was it that you ended up being, devoting the most time to?
Well, in Thailand, the Thai villagers call it Muay Thai or Thai boxing, and then Thai swordsmanship. They have a unique sword style. Then I got to study Tai Chi, which I've been doing for the last 50 years, and I studied Taekwondo with one of the great masters, Kim Myung-soo, and then studied Bakwa, and studied with some masters who only had 4 or 5 students, such as a dagger teacher I had in Laos named Tang Chang. And we used to even go to the market. He had a friend that owned a restaurant, and we'd practice slicing sides of beef from cow carcasses so we'd get the feel of a blade moving through meat and learn not to snag it.
That is fantastic. So
A typical background most people have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wanted to kind of amplify on that. So the thing that's so really interesting about your career is that it's encompass visual effects, supervision, and producing, but also design, title design, second unit direction, conceptual design, weapons design, and martial arts. So as we're talking about martial arts, can we get it? You of course famously created the supremely iconic batleth.
Yep, here is batleth number 1.
Fantastic. So what was the genesis of that amazing weapon?
Well, we had an episode where Worf was to inherit this primordial Klingon bladed weapon, and the art department, who are great guys, great friends, great artists, they sent down a drawing that looked like a pirate's cutlass, and I had been thinking about this weapon but had no reason to create one, and I thought the Klingon should have something unique but ergonomically sound. Even as a kid, I didn't like phony movie weapons, and so I made one out of foam core, took it to Rick Berman, showed him, hey, we could do this for the Klingons. It's new and makes ergonomic sense. And I showed him some moves with it. And typical of Rick, he said, if that was 2 inches shorter, I'd accept it. And then Dennis Madelone, our wonderful stud coordinator, came in. I showed it to him, and he said, that's horrible, and I can't work with that. And then I showed him some tricks and how the decapitation flange worked. And he said, oh, I can work with that. And he became one of the great evangelists of the batleth.
Fantastic. Do you have anything you can show us that is indicative of that development process that you just mentioned?
Yeah, well, when Michael Dorn signed on to Deep Space Nine, I got this wonderful phone call, Daniel, I need a new weapon. And so Michael came over to the house and looked at different weapons I'd collected over the years and wanted something small enough he could hide behind his back, but large enough to be able to handle a batleth and other large weapons if wielded by a skilled warrior. So I recommended the tip of a Nepalese Kora sword. And so Michael and I designed this out of corrugated cardboard reinforced with popsicle sticks. And we went out in the backyard and played around with it. And Michael liked it, I liked it. And so that became the Mek'leth. And there were no changes. And I wanted something you could go backhand, forehand, could grapple. You could cut with all sorts of different parts of it. And you could also throw it like a hatchet, like Kirk Douglas in the Vikings.
Yeah. What a great reference. Yeah, what a great film.
Can I give you a Michael Dorn story while we're here?
So please do, Ben.
Let's let Ben talk. I don't want to monopolize.
What Dan didn't realise was that Michael Dorn had actually based quite a lot of Worf on Dan. So when I talked to Dawn about it, he's like, yeah, well, in the first season or so, Worf just growls and he's just like this. And I was like, I didn't think that was very interesting. And then he kind of got the idea that he would be more of a martial artist, and he would have like the clever Klingon weapons and that kind of stuff. And then he said, I wanted him to be more like Dan. So I pushed for all those kind of qualities to it. So without Dan, Worf would be very different.
That is such a great story. That's brilliant. That must feel really good hearing that. I mean, for him to be such an iconic character and to be so much a part of his DNA, that must feel pretty good. And you designed his weapons. And I'm assuming you gave Dawn a bit of martial arts tuition also. Is that right?
Oh, we used to work together all the time. And then the writers picked up on it, and they would actually write scenes where Michael Dorn would be conducting a martial arts class on the Enterprise. And in those scenes, I would be standing next to the camera doing the moves so Michael could see me. And that's how those were shot. But I must say, Michael was gracious and wonderful to work with, an eager learner. And I consider the opportunity to work with Michael one of the greatest benefits of being part of Star Trek.
Just fantastic. And Ben, I'm right in thinking that he was an eager contributor to the book, am I right?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big things about this is that anyone who knows Dan knows how different he is to everybody else, as you've already gathered from a little bit of this conversation. And I thought it was really important to get a bit of that into the book. And Dan couldn't really sit there and tell everyone how amazing he was. In fact, he insists on doing the opposite. So I made a point of trying to talk to as many other people as I could about Dan. So Dawn was one of the first big ones, and he's in there a couple of times. But we talked to Kate Mulgrew, to Scott Bakula. I'm trying to think who else. We took loads of other people who worked with him on a day-to-day basis. So Peter Lauritsen, Ron Moore, Fred Raimondi, all these people, and they all have a Dan story. Everybody has a Dan story.
Which is exactly what you need for a book of this nature. Now, Dan, let me ask you another very specific deep dive question. What was the genesis of the Renegade Borg cube? Well,
I always thought that in space, their aerodynamics was irrelevant because it's a vacuum, and I wanted to do something asymmetrical. I guess as a child, I was always fascinated by South Pacific canoes that had the outrigger on them. So I had that design, and one day I was sitting on the set chatting with LeVar Burton's son, and while we were chatting, I was carving this out of a piece of foam, and then put some black tape on it and painted some suggestions of detail and sent it to Greg Jean, the legendary model maker, and Greg made a spectacular version of the about 3 feet. And with the great model makers, it's always best to give them suggestions, but let them include their own creativity because you get their best work. And of course, that happened with Greg. And by a fluke, the Franklin Mint model was almost exactly the same size.
Oh yeah.
As my rough mock-up. So that's where that came from.
Until I heard you say it, I'd never got the outrigger connection. And now that you've said that, it just seems so obvious. And what a beautifully simple thing to take as the jumping off point. I think that's great. It's phenomenal. And of course ties into nautical history. What are the most unexpected elements and raw materials that went into designing visual effects that you could share with us?
One of the things that became one of our most valuable assets was liquid nitrogen. And liquid nitrogen is heavier than air. It's dense. It's safe to use if you don't touch it. And in liquid form, that is. And so we used it for a lot of time-space continuum anomalies. We used it for nebulosity. We even used it, we made a big trough and had liquid nitrogen running down at a slight angle on a plane and used air jets to blow it back, and used that for a wildfire on a planet. We had one where the Enterprise cleans off the atmosphere of this planet, and we made a vat lined with black velvet, put liquid nitrogen vapors in it, and just swatted it with a piece of cardboard, and the vapor would separate and come back together again, and use that for kind of the planet's atmosphere. And then I wound up reusing that element on Michael Jackson's music video, Black or White. And there's a moment where Michael's on the treadmill and he keeps pushing into a new reality. And I synced up that using it as a wiping element, as a mat. And so when Michael would go into a new reality, that was the mat, the wipe edge for that.
Wow, that is fascinating. I know exactly the moment you're talking about in that video. That's amazing. So when you look back on your long association with Star Trek, what's your favorite incarnation of the show? What was the thing that you enjoyed the most personally?
Oh, that's kind of a dangerous question, but it's like asking somebody with 4 children, which child do you love the most?
Yeah.
You love them all in different ways because each one had its own personality and its own subculture, and the subculture was partly reflective of the captain's the actor who portrayed the captain's personality, and the director of photography was always important. So I think I love them all for different reasons and in different ways. And each one represented a technological advance in visual effects technology and how things were done. So on Next Generation, we were doing matte paintings in oils by hand using primarily the great Sid Dutton, among others. Then as we got into CG a little bit at a time, as it got more visually acceptable, we did hybrid shows where the background ships were CG and the foreground ships, which looked better, were physical models. And then by the time we got to Enterprise, it was the first all CG show.
You're missing out the fact that you helped to develop Photoshop as well in the middle of that.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Is that all?
Yeah, exactly. So Dan had like an early copy of Photoshop from John Knoll, and it's and Ron told me that he was ringing up John Knoll saying, "John, you don't understand how people paint. This is not how it works. You've got to change it."
So Ben, what has been the highlight of working on this book with Dan for you?
Well, there are lots. Getting to know Dan better has been the best thing about it. We talk to one another pretty much every week for a year or so, and still do actually now because it's such a good thing. I think going back to what Dan was just saying, I think apart from the extraordinariness of Dan, the thing about the book is it is this kind of history of the visual effects industry at this really pivotal point. So when they started out, they were still very much using film techniques. I mean, they were using video, but they were still the same techniques you would have used on film. And then everything changes in the course of those 18 years that Dan's working on Star Trek. So, I mean, there's a lovely phrase he came up with when we were talking about this, from alchemy to algorithms. So, at the beginning, it's all this kind of bizarre experimentation, and everyone will tell you Dan had an extraordinary eye for seeing things that other people wouldn't see. And then by the end, it's about bringing that kind of fine art sensibility to computer graphics. And there's an interesting bit in the middle, which I guess you still do, Dan, where you're like combining practical elements with CG, and it's never quite as clear cut as you might think.
Yeah, I always find nothing's more real than real, and whenever you can include something real, it enhances it, and sometimes it's cheaper and better. There was a spy comedy I worked on for NBC called Chuck, and there was a moment where there was a microcomputer built into the arms on a pair of glasses, and I was working with my compositor and he said, well, it'll take me a couple of days to develop the particle animation. It'll take me this and that. And I said, well, we don't have to do any of that. So I taped a piece of black velvet onto the wall, took 2 desk lamps and cross-lit it, found somebody who smoked and had them blow smoke into a plastic box. And I remembered my father used to amuse my brother and I when we were kids by taking the cellophane off the cigarette package wrapper, sliding it down, burning a hole in it, blowing smoke in it, and by tapping the bottom, puffs of smoke would come up. And so I had the smoker blow smoke in this box and tapped it, and with my iPhone shot puffs of smoke coming up, composited into the scene, and it took 15 minutes to get something almost for free that would have taken days of computer animation.
Yeah, there are loads of Star Trek examples of that as well. So there's like an Enterprise episode where they have like the shadow of a Xindi insectoid walking across the wall. Dan just made a kind of like a Thai shadow puppet, and they used that, you know, and you'd think it was going to be some kind of big complicated affair. Or like in that shot he was talking about before, is that he didn't mention how much they used vacuum cleaners. You know, vacuum cleaners and pom-poms are a big part of Star Trek visual effects for 10 years.
Yeah, actually, here is, this is the force field around the Enterprise.
That's great. That is brilliant. Hey, can I just, before we go, can I just jump in with two key non-Star Trek questions? One is, what was it like working on Buck Rogers?
It was great. And it was my introduction. Have to compliment Peter Anderson, one of my great mentors. And here is a painting I did for Buck Rogers of a space station. Beautiful. And so I loved it, and I got to learn about motion control and matte painting, and worked with a great guy, David Stipes, as the matte cameraman. And so that was, we had about 80 people working 16 hours a day, and about 12 optical printers constantly running to put the shots together. That did less than we could do with a fraction of that people doing things digitally later on with, say, with Star Trek Enterprise. But I have to say, for me, one of the joys of working on this book was getting to know Ben better. And without Ben and his understanding of publishing and his knowledge of Star Trek, which is infinitely greater than mine, the book would not have happened.
Right on. Yeah, right on. Very few people have the knowledge of Star Trek that Ben Robinson has. That's what I've learned over the years. And finally, Dan, who's your favourite character in gunfights at the OK Corral? And apart from Morgan, who is DeForest Kelley, of course. So who was the standout character in that movie for you?
Well, obviously, it's always been Kirk Douglas. And I took up knife throwing after watching the scene where Kirk Douglas, as a drunk Doc Holliday, is sitting in a hotel room throwing a brace of switchblades into a door. So my brother and I went home, put up planks of wood in our basement, borrowed a lot of steak knives, which we destroyed and almost killed ourselves with. But eventually we got good at knife throwing, and I carried it on. And on a fluke, I got to spend a few days with a circus in Madrid, Spain in the 1970s, and hung out with their knife thrower and learned some tricks from him. And
this is a typical Dan conversation.
Brilliant.
I just happened to be hanging out with the circus. I just happened to be jamming with Jimi Hendrix. I just happened to be with Michael Jackson. This is what talking to Dan is like. And he still throws knives every morning. I do
10 throws every day.
Fantastic. You know, that will be my penultimate question. Just such a brilliant answer. My final question, of course, is, why? I'm saying, of course, you don't know what it is I'm going to say. But Dan, for you, why do you think Star Trek has retained the power over the public that it has for all these 50 years plus? What do you think the power of Star Trek actually is?
Well, I think that goes back to Gene Roddenberry and his vision. And I think the public responds to a future where our species has our act together in terms of conquering disease, which is even more meaningful now, in terms of conquering poverty, letting each individual explore their potential to the fullest, and that spirit of exploration and discovering new things. I think also Gene's idea of the prime directive, which was his reaction after some conversations with him about it, to the period of colonialism where an advanced culture would just show up and take over. And he felt there was something morally wrong about that. And so that's why the prime directive was an important factor in so many Star Trek episodes where we encountered less advanced species and would not interfere with their cultural progress. I think another thing is there are warnings in Star Trek. The Borg are particularly scary because we are the Borg. Here I sit with an artificial hip, and I know people with artificial knees and all sorts of implants and things that are coming up further, especially with CRISPR, new genetic technology. We have to be vigilant about turning ourselves into the Borg so that we retain our humanity. So Star Trek gives the audience promise and warnings. Be vigilant, but take advantage of the technology we can create for ourselves.
Well said, mate. Well, what a great way to go out, and that's awesome. Thank you very much for the both of you, the mighty Ben Robinson and the unique and supremely talented Dan Curry, to talk us through this amazing book, which any Star Trek fan is going to absolutely love. Star Trek, The Artistry of Dan Curry. It's available to order from the links attached to this interview. And gents, thanks so much for rinsing out the time for me. It's great to chat to you both. I could carry on asking you these questions, Dan. I know, having now spoken, this is what Ben told me it was going to be like, by the way. After having talked to you now for half an hour, I want to talk to you for another 2 hours. So thanks for sharing the time with us. It's been awesome.
Well, okay. Well, you warned him, Ben.
You can never quite warn people enough about that.
Yeah, I'm prolific at spewing forth the verbal equivalent of solid waste.
Well, that's one of many, many beautiful talents. Take care of yourself, guys, and thanks for joining us. All the best.
Hey, thank you, Ben.
Bye.
Bye-bye.